So, how was that? Did you enjoy it? Wasn't that something? All right. Now, notice how it's ironic. You're doing a lot of things at the same time, aren't you? I mean, look at this little diagram here. It's kind of like a confusing bad hair day. And you're doing it all at the same time. And ironically, isn't that easier to do, or doesn't it feel easier to do that than some of the exercises you did in the first and second day? Right? And that's because a lot of things are now, like a lot of things like this thing here, the language is becoming intuitive now. You're not having to think about it too much. Who here is still thinking about what words, power words, and the hot words, and similes and so on to choose? Anyone think about that a little bit? Yeah, you missed the first day, so you're going to catch up a little bit. For the first time, yeah. So, it'll catch up, it'll get easier. The point is, the more you do this, the easier it'll get. And then all these extra layers you put on top of it, well, they start getting more and more natural, right? And then it's just a question of which one's going to be useful given the interaction you have right now. So anything you want to comment on before we start elaborating on what we've done so far? Do you want to come up?
Ralph and I was working together, and I was telling him about my own private hypnosis practice and describing Nicole and things like that. And what was really interesting is that as I was describing it, and at one point, it became direct hypnosis.
Right.
And he said that, hey, what's the 5-word induction that I did on Nicole? He said, oh, let me show you.
Right.
And I did the induction, and he fell right in. And then did the deepener.
It's very naturalistic, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and this is something very interesting. I mean, this is what I would call a semi-covert induction. Everyone thinks that Milton Erickson was a covert hypnotist, and in many respects he was. But most of his work was actually semi-covert. In other words, people knew something was happening, it's just they had no idea what it was, right?
Right.
And that's exactly what you're starting doing now. You're blending covert hypnosis with overt hypnosis. One makes the other one more easy, the other one's a bit more fast. So you tell a story about someone, doing an induction with someone and having a great trance. And then you do that with them, and then it's a lot easier. Why? Because they've already done it once.
Right.
Right? They've been through it.
Exactly. I believe I planted the idea at the beginning. I wasn't planning to do a formal induction with him, but I said that Nicole was really interested in hypnosis and hypnosis induction. So later on, in the middle of the story, you said that, oh, really? What is that induction? So then you could just naturally flow into it, seeing the ideas.
What you just did there, and this is something which is very useful for you guys, I call unconscious formatting. Think about it. If I tell you about a hypnotic process, and I tell it to you in such detail, and I'm observing you so I know that you're going through each step kind of with me as you're thinking about it, at the end of it, you'll have had the experience at least once already, will you not? So when we do it again, well, you'll know what response to give, right? If I talk to you about someone, oh, we did this instant induction, it's great, this guy was there, and he was really keen. So, I asked him to stand there, and he's a great subject, because he was doing exactly what I was asking of him, right? And he said, then he waited patiently, and I said, okay, look at me, and he focused on me intently. And then, when the magic happens, you can always tell, because people do this. It's true, right? You'll find out in a minute, but he did the exact same thing as everyone else does. You go this. Now, of course, what am I doing? I'm showing his unconscious mind how I expect him to respond. I learned this trick from a stage hypnotist, believe it or not, who did a TV show once and told me about this. He did a TV show, and he did an instant induction on a person, I think it was a lady, I'm not sure, when he came on screen, first of all. And she was such a flopper. I mean, she just went, crashed out. He had to grab her and gently let her, go down to the ground. And of course, the whole audience like, stunned. Now, after that pattern's been set, how do you think every other person responded with his trance induction, right? I mean, as far as they were concerned, he was hypnotic god at that point. Why not? Because they've seen one example. This must be how it happens. So, okay, that's how I go with it. They have no other concept of how to respond. It's not that they're choosing to do it. It's just that that's how their mind's been formatted. It's called, in the classical literature, it's called subconscious priming. You're priming the mind, preparing it for a certain kind of response, and it feels natural, intuitive, and so on, but it's being pre-selected ahead of time. Make sense? So that's a great example of priming, so thank you for that. Come on up.
Oh, it is adjusting for me. Okay. I actually found that exercise to be a great experience because not only, it wasn't so much, like we did touch on the themes and such, but not a lot of power words came out. But it was like they weren't needed because there was a lot of H plus going on. So it was almost as if being in a regular conversation, and it slipped together like a regular conversation, the whole thing. But it was like the feelings usually with a story were intensified.
Right.
And that was it. And that it continued itself even after the story was finished, that you could still feel that emotion through the interaction.
Afterglow. Exactly.
Yes.
Now, what Cassandra's describing, by the way, that's exactly how conversational hypnosis feels. That's how most people will describe it. It was just like a really fascinating conversation. It was great, right? And notice the other thing which is important, and I'm really glad that you're saying this because this is what we talked about on the very first day. Most people think that conversation hypnosis is about language, right? Now the language is important. It has a very important function and role to play. But it's not about the language, it's about the context that you create. And the language is a tool to help create that context, right? Does that make sense? So just memorizing the magic words will not do this for you. It's creating the context and starting with the H plus and so on that does that. So thank you, that's a great
No problem.
comment to make. Come on up.
What I noticed actually, last night I was with my buddy Tom, and he was telling me, he was actually describing to me an experience of him working with someone in trance. And obviously I'm aware of, you know, how you can talk about trance. It was the first time really that I profoundly felt myself going into trance. And me being a hypnotist, I caught myself, well, is he trying to induce me, or
Or is it just a great story?
yeah,
right?
and I don't think he was. I think he was describing it to me. And then the realization I had is one of the things about telling a story about someone else, my friend John, is that it actually takes your conscious mind away from analyzing what's going on.
Exactly.
And it's a way of, you know, opening the gates to allow the suggestions to go right in, because I was so focused on the story, and I actually caught myself going into trance. He said, you're getting more relaxed. Or he didn't say I was, but he was saying the person.
The person was getting more relaxed and comfortable, his breathing shifted.
Yeah, and then I said, dude, are you trying to hypnotize me? Exactly.
It's awesome. But yeah, again, this is a great example of how natural this stuff is. Does this feel natural to you guys? Yeah? And it is absolutely natural when you put all the pieces in place, right? If it was just like saying, okay, tell a story and then just use your power words, great. Then people are going, okay, I had a friend called John, and can you imagine John going into a trance now, right? You can hopefully hear that that's not the way that people normally speak, right? But that's the way people normally speak when they're focusing on structure and language. What part of their mind is focusing on that? It's their conscious mind, right? Of course, their unconscious mind is the one that actually does the work. It's how we speak. We don't choose our words consciously. They just happen. And of course, you will recognize the conscious and unconscious association beginning to occur here, just as I'm explaining it. And that's the whole point. It should be so natural, so seamless, so fluid. It's just a fascinating conversation. And by the way, this is why what you were talking about again, which is you'll find people are doing this to you by accident quite often, and you'll ask yourself, are these people trying to hypnotize me right now? Or is it just like, no, they're just telling you something with such engagement themselves that they're accidentally creating H+, and that's sucking you into the whole thing. Make sense? So now you get to use it as a force for good whenever you want to, which is nice. Go ahead.
I didn't think about any of that stuff. The only thing that I thought about is I had an experience that I wanted him to convey, which was the experience that the person had that I was telling about. And I became so engaged in the story I was telling.
Right.
But the one thing is I had the intention of the H+.
Yes.
And the rest of it was out the window for me, and I really I do think he was tranced, and he was experiencing what I wanted him to experience.
You're describing exactly the thing that we're talking about, right? It sounds a little bit blasé when I say this, but when I say I really don't have any idea what I'm doing up here, I don't mean that in the sense like I'm a fraud. Ha 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 ha. How foolish do you feel now? It's more that, I'm really not conscious of what I'm doing. My intention is, all right, I want to demonstrate a particular kind of induction, and I'll just do with it. Sometimes, I'm in the middle of the induction, I get so carried away with it, I have to stop myself because I'm going somewhere completely different, going like, oh, no, I'm meant to be showing them this. Oh, that feels really good there, though, right? It's just naturally taking me down one road or another. So you need to let yourself be carried away by your own processes. That's what makes it easy. Do you recall how we talked about the H+? It's both a shield and a sword. Well, this is how it works for you. When you create the H+, you're kind of so carried away by it, it is easy. Now, after the break, is it after the break? Let me just double check. Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
That's right.
Oh, yes. How would you like to discover a very simple induction, one which is so simple, it actually requires no thought on your part whatsoever. It's very enjoyable to do. It's easy. You will never forget it. You will always know exactly what to say. And it will probably take people into deeper trances than they've ever experienced before. Would you like to discover that?
I'll skip that one.
It's something I call the irresistible induction. But before we get there, does this sort of make sense? Yes?